You guys, one of my favorite bands is The Doors. The Doors have a song called The End. It says, "This is the end, my childish friend, the end." I can't remember how it goes, but the end looms large. This is the end. This is the last lecture in this series, and it always seems funny as a prof. You know, you're kind of teaching away and doing your thing, and then suddenly you find like, oh my goodness, this is the last lecture, and to some extent it is a little bit sad because I think we've all been through a very interesting term together. One we hope we don't have to repeat in quite the same way. I know it's been very stressful for you guys for all the reasons it's stressful for everybody, but you're also, this was not the image you had of your University of Toronto education. I had a real heart-to-heart chat with one of you, and you know who you are, who told me a story about, he's from China and he was looking forward to U of T and had this whole notion of what life is like on a North American campus, all the images you see in movies and people out in the quad and talking in cafeterias and getting to know new friends. And the truth of the matter is a lot of what makes the university experience great is what happens outside of the classroom. And this student was saying to me that, what he's getting is not what he imagined, and that was very hard for him. And I understand that completely and utterly. It's been a tough year for you guys. It'll be a better year next year. It will be a better year next year, and I think it's important that we all know that, hang on to that, grasp it. But in the meantime, we did the best we could with the situation we're at, and I really felt a lot of support from a lot of you guys. I hope you feel supported by us as well. And, I hope this weird little learning experience we crafted here was one that you found enjoyable and interesting. And of course, even though this is my last lecture, it's not really the end of the course. The course continues in Psych AO2. And your professor there is Kyle Danielson. By the way, I'll introduce you to him just below. And he's a fantastic professor. Students will like him very much. He'll use a very similar style to what I've been using, so it'll be a very familiar kind of format to you by then. You're going to have a great time. There's a bunch of cool stuff in that next course. So for you guys, really, this is more of a halftime. But yeah, I'll be leaving the field for this one. So for me, it's more of an end than it is for you. So what I decided to do in this last lecture then is just kind of briefly kind of go over the ground we've walked. And I'm not going to obviously hit all the high points, but I just wanted to sort of go chapter by chapter and have a top three for every chapter. The main 3 points that I hope that you got. Of course, you're responsible for the entire chapter on exams and stuff, so don't assume what I'm highlighting today is going to be especially represented. This is more just, for you to kind of look back, or for us to look back on the path we've traveled, and for me to actually emphasize a few more points that I really want to make sure we're clear as we go. I'll then talk about a few other things at the end, and then that will be it. Alrighty, so let's jump into the last lecture, the tearful goodbye, I called it. Okay, I'm not crying yet, but who knows? All right, so let's just kind of go chapter by chapter, and again, I'm going to hit sort of a top three as we go through. And so the first chapter was sort of the history of psychology, or I think it's called What is Psychology? And so here are the things that I hope you get from that. So first of all, psychology is a very young science. Really that first lab was the late 1800s, so just over 100 years old, but really a lot of our methods and approaches that we use today go back more to the 1950s, the 1960s. And so really we're talking more like 60, years that psychology has been in the experimental business that we know of it as today. Of course, psychology is a very complex, I've given you the story. If you want easy sciences, go with physics or chemistry. Maybe you can capture things in formulas. They're so easy. Psychology is complex. Human behavior is very complex. And that means there's a lot of cool stuff yet to do. So unlike most of the other existing sciences, the most influential work in psychology may still be to come. And you could be the one who does it. This is what made me find psychology so interesting. With physics or chemistry, I felt like I was learning what we know. But I didn't really feel like there was that much opportunity that I would actually advance what we know. And of course you could. In all those fields, people are advancing it. But a lot of it we already know. In psychology, I think there's a lot we don't know. And so that made it exciting for me that I could be actually part of breakthroughs in understanding and breakthroughs in application, maybe. I hope that's exciting for you too. I hope that kind of makes you think, oh, psychology could be where I make my name, maybe. And of course, I really hope that you understand from that this psychology is so very broad. And this is why it's hard when people say things like, well, what kind of job can I get with an undergraduate degree in psychology? It's like, wow. Well, just any job where humans are involved. It's sort of the answer, right? It's so broad, and people with psychology degrees go on and do so many things. By the way, I know from a presentation that I saw that a degree in psychology is one that is associated with a pretty high likelihood of getting some sort of job. In fact, higher than virtually most of the other disciplines, and often the pay is pretty decent as well. It's just, unlike an accounting program where you know what that person is going to do, or various other computer science, you kind of know what the person is going to do. In psychology, people are doing so many things. And yeah, they range from, understanding the brain, a real biological thing, to clinical therapy. It also ranges from research in the lab to the kind of research that I do, which is much more in the real world. And so it's extremely broad. And if there isn't something in psychology you find fascinating, I find that amazing. I suspect some of this course you found fascinating, some maybe not so much. But again, that's the breadth of psychology. There's something for everybody somewhere in psychology. So that's the sort of history, the sense of what psychology is about. Then we moved on to chapter 2, research methods. And here are the points I hope you really got from that. Especially in this, what we're calling post-truth world, where you're seeing some forces not trust the scientists, not trust the experts. It's important to realize that what science is really about is a process of getting at the truth. And it's a process that has a lot of checks in place. Things like peer review, things like statistical methods that ensure that something you saw is in fact reliable. Things like replication, even if you did get something published, other people will often try to replicate it. This doesn't make science perfect. In fact, you may have actually heard in psychology there was a failure to replicate issue where a lot of the classic studies, when other people tried to replicate them, they had trouble doing so. And that shook us all. But that's the other good thing about the scientific process. You can check whether something is in fact true. You can try to replicate, and you can very clearly show if there's any doubt involved. This is the advantage of scientific truth versus social media truth. Social media truth is just somebody says something and it's been repeated so many times from so many angles that you start to believe it's true because you've seen it over and over again. That's not how things are supposed to be true. You're supposed to show experimentally that something is true. And that's what the scientific process is about. We should trust science above opinion. That should not be a controversial thing to say out loud. When it comes to science, experiments represent the best way to get at causal relationships. They are the gold standard. They are what we would, if we really want to understand something, we want to get to an experiment to understand it. That's why I kind of had you guys in Peer Scholar go looking for those experimental reports, to get a sense of what an experiment really is, what it looks like, what it's like to read. An experiment directly published in a journal, what we call a primary source. And so I hope you'll come to a respect for experiments, and similarly, a healthy skepticism about correlational stuff. So often in the media, you're going to be fed correlations. People on the news, you'll see, oh, there's this latest finding. And when you really think about it, you think, was that an experiment or was that a correlational study? And if it's a correlational study, yeah, it can be interesting. It can be the reason to do an experiment, but on its own, it can be misleading. And so I have cheeseburgers and cancer here, just to make this point one more time. It turns out there is a negative correlation. The more cheeseburgers you eat, the less likely you are to die of cancer. And that's true. It's 100% true. What's that seem to suggest? It seems to just suggest cheeseburgers are the cure for cancer, right? But this is the problem with correlations. You really got to think about them because they can come about for so many ways. For example, cheeseburgers really increase the likelihood that somebody will die of heart disease. Okay? In fact, you have to die of something, right? And so if cheeseburgers make you way more likely to die of heart disease, then that means other things like cancer can't really kill you. Maybe because you've had a heart attack before the cancer could catch you. So just because, cheeseburgers may be associated with a lower risk of cancer does not mean that they somehow cause that. There could be other variables involved, like, they increase your risk of dying of something else first. And therefore you're less likely to die of cancer. So it's a true correlation. And, I'm never doubting the correlation is true. It's just when you go to that level of what does it mean? What does it actually imply about the truth underlying something? That's where correlations are very slippery and very tricky. And so they're interesting. And again, they can make you decide, I want to do a proper study on this, a proper experiment. But they shouldn't be given undue weight above and beyond that. Where we really want to get to is experiments. We call at University of Toronto psychology, it's in our science program because we embrace the experiments that are done in psychology. And you've heard about some of those already. You'll hear about many more of them in the next course. It's chapter 2. Oh, I have a fourth here. Usually I tried to make them a top 3, but I snuck in a fourth, I guess. So the fourth here is, I want you to realize that even within science, there's a constant evolution in how we actually get at things. And some of the stuff, some of the way we've been doing psychology so far will likely change in the years to come. Approaches involving big data, mining big data sets, artificial intelligence as models, for example, of human psychology. And new technologies for watching the brain as it does stuff like fMRI. But what's the next step? All of these things are changing the way we do psychology. They're making us generally more objective and more precise. Computational models allow us to produce really specific theories of what we think is going on. And these imaging devices allow us to see things we couldn't see before, often in objective ways. So there's no doubt the methods that you've learned now are a snapshot of where psychology is now. But it'll change. And if you can be part of this change, by the way, if I connect this to the previous one where you could be a major figure in psychology in the future, this is probably the area where a lot of new development will happen and new results will be found. And, I suspect this is going to be the major direction psychology is going to go in at some point. And it'll require a whole different set of skills than psychologists have had in the past. Some of you I know are doing computer science and psychology. I hope you see, a fit there, because there certainly is. Okay, that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 was biology and neuroscience. Here are the big points I want you to take from that. 3/4 of your brain, and by this I mean the occipital, parietal, and temporal lobes, are dedicated to really making sense of the input from the world. Remember all this chaotic input coming in, and your brain has to try to sort through it and figure out what the heck is out there. And that's what a lot of your brain does. The other part, of course, is dedicated to now considering all that input and what your goals are, and then deciding how you're going to behave. At least this is the conscious behavior, the part that underlies your conscious behavior. Of course, as we learned from learning and a bunch of other things, there may be responses you emit just directly as a response to a stimulus. I'll mention that in another section in a moment. But sometimes the input can trigger a habitual response that your frontal lobes have nothing to do with. And in fact, that probably happens quite a bit. But the frontal lobes are where we consciously control our behavior. And that's, a big part of what's going on. So I almost think of the brain that way. 3/4 input, 1/4 behavior, output. And then this is something that, in this COVID world, I have continually been reminded of the importance of, and that's this, that the oldest parts of our brain, for example, the limbic system, often dominate the newer parts, the frontal lobes, especially in situations where our existence is being threatened. We go to a more primitive version of ourselves, a more emotion-based less intellectual way of responding. And this can happen, quite easily, and people will manipulate this. So when you hear of things like politicians manipulating your emotions, well, they are. If I can make you emotional, I can short circuit your ability to think rationally. And so really important to understand that we are both. We do some things from a rational basis. We do some things from this primitive sort of emotion survival kind of basis. And when push comes to shove, often the more primitive reaction is the one that wins. So if we want to be rational, we really have to work to do that, to sort of tame the primitive version of us that lives within us. And so I hope you kind of got that sort of distinction out there. Okay. I know this is the only time I've ever had a set of slides with no pictures. You guys are probably like, oh, what's all this words? It's going to be more words. I'm afraid. Let's keep going with our list as we go through. Then we got into sensation and perception. So we'd studied the brain, and we're thinking about the input now. And really the points that I want you to get from this is, first of all, realize there's way more out there than we even know. We're perceiving only a slight fraction of what's out there. And I don't know, this is the humility kind of angle that I like to point out. We have this impression that we humans are so amazing and so fantastic. But it's good sometimes to realize that, wow, there's other animals that can sense things we can't even sense. And even the things that we can sense, like vision, we're just getting a little tiny part of a light spectrum that's this wide. And so a little bit of humility and a little bit of realization that we are really just another life form out there who has sensory apparatus to kind of connect it with the external world. But we only ever know a small part of it. That part that you do know and the way you perceive it is remember those top-down processes. It's strongly affected by experiences you've had before that event. So your culture, your background, the life you have led shape the way you see the world. And that's why so many of us can watch the same things and see very, very different things. That, as we perceive that input, we filter it through our previous existence and what's important to us and what our opinions are, what our biases are, but also just what our perceptual experience has been. And so we end up with a highly personal perception of what's out there. And each of our perceptions, even of the exact same things, can be quite different because it's partly top down, partly bottom up. So I hope you got that. And of course, a lot of this happens without our awareness at all. That most often we look at the world and we get perception. That is the end of the process. We see a world full of organized, categorized, recognized objects in various parts of the world. Or we hear certain things and recognize or categorize what those sounds are. There's a bird, that's whatever. And that's where we tend to sort of live consciously. But there's a whole lot of processing that's happening below that, subliminal kinds of processing that's also going on, and we are just aware of the end product usually. Those are the big things from chapter 5. I'm just thinking I need a story or something. This is a list approach. I don't know if I'm liking it right now, but I'm going to continue going through. We got through chapter 5. We jumped to chapter 6, states of consciousness. This is where it gets a little more deep, maybe. First of all, we can only be conscious of one thing at a time. And when you compare that with that thing we talked about the world bombarding us with all the stimulation, plus our inner world potentially bombarding us with stuff, and yet we can only really be consciously aware of one thing at a time. And that consciousness keeps changing. We call it a stream of consciousness to some extent, because our mind keeps bouncing from one thing to another and kind of moving along. And so we have this conscious existence that's going on in that sort of way. We think this ability to experience things consciously, and this is sort of working memory kind of sneaking in here, is especially important when we're facing new problems or when we're trying to change habits. Habits kind of being solutions we had before. And once we've learned, when we're in this situation, we just do X. If we do that enough times, it becomes a habit. But if we suddenly want to change that habit, that's where we need to consciously intervene. And so maybe this is the things that conscious processes are for, learning something brand new at first and forming that habit. And then if we ever want to change habits, what that implies is that those habits we have built up, then they are often can be triggered without us having to consciously perceive things. Once we just put our key on that key ring every day, then when we go to work, we reach for that key ring and get our keys, and we never have to ask the question, where's our keys? Where did I leave my keys? What did I do? Once it becomes a habit, then it can just be executed without conscious processes. And so habits are actually, a big time-consuming approach that allows us to use our conscious processes for other things. And so we are perceiving stimuli without awareness. They can trigger these habitual responses. And as we also discussed, they also influence the way we consciously think about things. So if somebody's telling us something, we may perceive their nonverbal behavior unconsciously, but that may tell us whether we believe what they're saying or not. That perception without awareness may color our perception with awareness, the things we are aware of perceiving. And that seems the other role of how sort of perception without awareness influences us. Chapter 7, learning. These are the points I want you to take from that. Much of what we learned and the things we believe are the results of social imitation. We like what we like. We dress a certain way. We listen to certain music. And a lot of those things we do because those around us, that's what they did. That's what they were into. That's how they dressed. A lot of our learning is not really learning, it's imitation. And why? Well, imitation allows you to kind of fit in. If you do things like other people do, then they feel comfortable around you because you look like one of them to some extent. You agree with them on a lot of issues, and that makes you less dangerous, less scary. And so social imitation is a very powerful force, and we believe we've come to this place rationally. I like the kind of music I like because of all these characteristics, and we could kind of describe them. But a lot of people think, no, that's not really why you like it. You like it because your friends liked it. So that's one basis of learning. Now, back to these causal relationships like experiments. It's obvious the brain is always looking for these. And this is, I'm really getting to classical conditioning here. When something reliably predicts some future event, we learn that. And we learn that pretty quickly. And why? Because our brain is always wanting to predict the future and be ready for it in advance. And so if you can sense that something predicts something else, you'll start to respond to that first thing like it's that next thing. You're starting to get your response ready and prepare it. And so this classical conditioning really shows how much the brain is forward-looking and trying to predict the future. Of course, COVID messed up our ability to predict the future and left us all feeling very anxious. That's just an example of what the brain feels like when it can't predict the future. It wants to. And classical conditioning shows us the mechanism it uses to do that. And then, of course, as we've learned some behaviors, but we try to generalize them to new situations and stuff, we emit them and consequences follow. And the work from operant conditioning shows us that those consequences shape our future behavior in predictable ways. And that we can even use consequences to alter someone's behavior in a therapeutic kind of way. So you will learn next chapter about what we're going to call cognitive behavior therapy. And the behavior part will be operant conditioning. Or classical conditioning. We will use these processes to try to help somebody get their behavior to a better place. And so there's actual, therapeutic potential to some of this stuff. Getting to the home stretch. Chapter 8, memory. Here's what I want you to know about memory, or make sure you got. Psychologists see memory at play anytime the past influences the current behavior. So very broad definition of memory. There's not a single memory. There's multiple systems. So remember that model. And remember, even within working memory, we kind of pulled it apart. And then within long-term memory, we talked about different kinds of long-term memory. So there's actually a lot of different memory systems that have different roles that they play for us, and different characteristics in terms of how they acquire information and hold on to it and those sorts of things. So I hope, that was clear for you. And, the thing we really think of as memory, episodic or autobiographical memory, it gives us the illusion of replaying past experiences, but what we're really seeing is recreations, and that can include errors we don't see. And so the false memory experiment that I had you do, I hope that you endorsed one of those words, be it needle or bed. I hope that you said, yeah, that was there, and felt confident, and we're wrong because I want to show you that can happen. Okay, and so finally, chapter 9. Humans seem unique in their ability to use language in rich ways. So language is something that we really do in a way that no other animal does. And that seems to have give us this power of going across space and time, as I talked to you about, that really helps us dominate other animals on this planet. There's also this notion from language research and the genie stuff I told you about specifically that tells us about development in the brain, and you're going to learn about that more next term, but the idea that the brain might be ready to learn certain things at certain times of one's life. But if you don't have the experience or the ability to learn that, then you may miss the bus. When that period's over, it may be very hard to learn that. So we call that critical periods of development. And we first learned about them from Genie and others in the language area. It may apply to other areas as well. And then finally, just when it comes to solving problems, we often result on these cognitive shortcuts that we call heuristics, things like availability and representativeness. And we rely on them more than rational thought. We're not good at rational thought. We can be okay at it if everything's very concrete. But as soon as it becomes abstract, we're not very good at it at all. And so this is again the interplay of the more sort of primitive way of being versus the more frontal lobe way of being. And once again, we see that primitive side of us is still often dominant. And we're really learning how to use our critical thinking abilities, and using those to overcome sometimes more emotion-based responding. But it's not what we're good at. The emotions still win. The primitive still wins. Okay, that was a quick tour of 8 chapters, but I just wanted to reiterate those points and make sure that they're all kind of clear to you, and that hopefully you're nodding your head going, oh, yeah, right, yep, that makes sense to me. Okay, and now, so all I want to leave you with here are some odds and ends, and these are from me now. There's the course, there's the psychology you learned about, and then there's this dude who taught it to you, and this dude has a hard time separating some of his passions from pure psychology. So I just want to quickly speak to each of these. I hope one of the things that I've done here in some of my discussions about my thoughts on animal research, and maybe on advancing education even, that it has shown you that you should be passionate about something, and not necessarily what I'm passionate about, of course, at all. But my hope is that seeing me trying to make a difference when I have the opportunity to do so in things that I care about will suggest that you should do the same thing, because I do think you should. I think it's important to your happiness and your feeling of value to find things that you're passionate about, find things you don't like about the world, and then try to change them. And don't worry about whether you'll ever change it or not. That's not the point. The point is to try. And if it's something that's going to take a great deal of work, like I want the world to be vegetarian. I want the world to be vegan, to be honest. I have to get myself vegan totally first. Work in progress here. But that's what I would like to see happen. Is it going to happen in my lifetime? It'd be great if it did. But I don't think it will. But I'm going to push that rock a little bit. Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. I'm going to push the rock a little bit. I'm going to try to do what I can to move that forward. And if enough other people do, and if there's a little bit of good luck and a little bit of stars aligning, who knows? Sometimes people fight something for a long time and get nowhere, and then suddenly there's a big jump forward. And so maybe for you, it's about maybe women's rights. Maybe it's about racial equality. Maybe it's about who knows, whatever it is. If you can find a passion and then decide to make it a part of your life, to try to do something about that, I highly recommend that. I think it's a really good thing to do. Second one is something that I've kind of discovered during COVID. I was very fortunate. I was a psychology geek. I love psychology. And so I learned all this stuff, and I was learning for me. And I was getting a job from what I was learning, and it was great. And I was just feeding my own interest and curiosity and desire to know. And then COVID came along, and I realized that what I knew could be valuable to a lot of people at this time. Uh, and so I decided to start helping, to start spreading information, doing what I know I can do, which is teach courses and share information and share, skills that I think people should develop. And I just want to throw this out to you. Every now and then you will find yourself in a position where the skills or abilities you have could be helpful to somebody. And if you're in a position to help. I'll just leave it there. And of course, I couldn't leave you without leaving you with this point. I think it's important to learn, say, about psychology, learn who these figures are, learn all this knowledge that you're learning in university. But while you're learning the knowledge, also understand the importance of learning the skills. And you now know that knowledge is like episodic semantic memory, skills are procedural memory, and they develop very differently. And they develop through practice, through exercise. So as you go through your studies, try to constantly be exercising your critical thought and your creative thought and your communication skills. Turn your freaking cameras on when you go to office hours. Work on your professional communication skills on things like that, and see that as a critical part of your education. What I like to tell students, and sorry, by the way, also, like with Peer Scholar, it's supposed to give you all this exercise, but the real focus of the Peer Scholar thing is phase 3, learning from feedback, learning to grow, opening your mind to the opinions of others about your work, even the flaws, and learning from it and getting better. If you can learn that skill, I almost guarantee you life will go well. You will be one of these people that shows yourself as someone who's willing to learn and grow. And that is a very powerful impression to give somebody. They suddenly think they could put you in any job and you could succeed. And that's really, very, very powerful. So focus on your skill growth. Take the time to practice. Keep the following thing in mind. One day, you will be interviewing for a job you badly want. Yes, they might ask you something about your knowledge. But what the interview is really about is you being able to interact with other human beings, to show your ability to think on the fly, and to express yourself in clear, articulate ways, but also to listen to them and show that you understood and listened to them, and therefore your responses align with their questions. That interview, I almost want to have that in your mind. That interview that you really want. What can you do now to make sure you get that interview 2 or 3 years now, two or 3 years from now, that you win that job? Work on your human skills. Practice all these things every chance you get. Don't see university just as a place to get knowledge. See it as a gym for the mind. And when you get a chance to use those skills, use them, exercise them, make them stronger. That's the best thing you can do for your success, in my opinion. And I want every one of you guys to succeed. Okay, so there we go. Thank you. Tearful goodbye time. But really, I do want to say thank you. I think this course has been good for my mental health. It keeps me thinking about stuff and how to structure things. I've enjoyed the office hours and the office hours crew a lot, and they will continue through the exam period. But yeah, I really do want to say thank you. And I want to let you know that, I'm a person in your neighborhood. I will always be a person in your neighborhood while you're here at UTSC and even after you graduate. So, if you have questions or issues that you'd like to talk to a faculty member about, my email address. Feel free to reach out. And, we'll be, obviously this isn't goodbye in the sense that we'll be connecting throughout the exam period. I will have additional office hours through the exam period. There'll be practice and such. And so you're going to be hearing from me over the next little while. But you won't be hearing from me like this, not the blue cube. Well, maybe I'll post some videos, who knows. But I largely want to say thank you very much. I hope it was a great learning experience for you. I wish you nothing but success, and I can't wait till we're all back to normal. So, next year, if you see me in the hallway and you want to say hi, please don't feel shy. There's something you may not realize about me. When you see me, because it's what everybody says. I'm 6'3". I'm a lot taller than I seem when I'm sitting here. So when you see this tall guy with the bushy hair, feel free to say, "Hey, Professor Jordans, I was in your online course, and it's weird to see you in person." And I'll say, "Same with you. It's weird to see you too," and that'll be very cool. All right, stay healthy, everybody. Get through this exam period. Enjoy your time off, and good times are ahead. Good times are ahead. All righty. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.